April 7th, 2020, Sony announces on their blog page the PS5 controller, or the DualSense controller. What's up everybody, Speed Demon 706 here, and today I'm here to share with you some big news as if you already don't know. Sony has released some big information regarding their controller, the PS5 controller, or the DualSense controller. Now, if you haven't heard about this, then thank you for tuning in and finding out about this. It was released April 7th, as stated earlier, and the controller itself, that was the information. The controller itself is not set to release until the holiday season of 2020, which typically means it's going to be released with the console between October and December timeframe. Now, until then, we're going to get more information, but this is groundbreaking. This is the most information we've got about this controller. There's been rumors, there's been a lot of things floating around, like a lot of things with Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony, all of that stuff. There's always something floating around, but this is groundbreaking because this stuff was confirmed. First, a statement from Sony stating that they're strongly embracing this change in the next generation. They're ready to move forward, and as most people know, Sony isn't widely known for change in their aesthetics for the controllers. So if you look back at the early generations of the PlayStation controller, it didn't have analog sticks. Then you move forward a little bit and then they threw on some analog sticks and the build was relatively the same. Then you look at the PS2, same thing. They just changed subtle things. They changed the color, they changed the little analog button, but it's still relatively the same. It still had the same grip, same feel, same thing, and they just added a couple more buttons. And then you move on to the PS3. There was 4 little LEDs moved to the top, and it had a rumble feature. I believe that was in the PS3 as well, I'm not sure. But ultimately, the aesthetic and the feel was relatively the same. Then you move forward to the PlayStation 4 controllers, and those were revolutionary. That was mind-blowing. Whoa, look at Sony making these huge changes. When really there was just the LED bar and the touchpad, and then the 2 little buttons that said share and options. But relatively, they were still the same. They were still the same grip, same feel, all of that stuff. But after years and years, PlayStation, or Sony, has decided to revamp this controller, and by looking at it, there is a lot to cover. So first, one of the main noticeable things is the shape. The shape is so different, but at the same time, it's really not that different. And it's already floating around the internet. It's floating around on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And if you haven't seen any of these, you're probably gonna come across it if you haven't already. But it really looks like the PS4 controller and the Xbox One controller kind of merged together and made like a hybrid. It's really what it looks like, and that's the vibes that I get whenever I first saw this. I really felt like that's what happened, is you have an integration of the PS4 controller and the Xbox One controller. The texture. So the texture is slightly different. If you look at the PS4 controller, it's got one type of texture and it's kind of got like a slick finish. And if you look at the PS5 or the DualSense controller, it has a slightly different texture to it. And the reasoning for that is to enable players to have a better grip and better feel and make it more comfortable in the hands of those players. The next thing is the light bar. So everybody knows that on the PS4 controller, that light bar is on the front or the back, however you're holding your controller. If you're holding it towards you, it's obviously right here in the front of the controller. It's the LED bar, and it's really big and vibrant facing away from you. So if you really wanted to see your light, you kind of had to tilt it up and look and see if you were connected, see what player you were, or to make sure it was even functioning. And then the later generations of those controllers, they had put a little slit on the top of the touch sensor so that way you could see that light. Well, the PS5 controller is slightly different. Not a whole lot different, but slightly different, and still enough to make a difference. So this middle bar, or the middle button, is slightly raised to have some separation between that button and that controller. And then in between that touch button, you see that there's LEDs, or the LED bars on the side shining through, so the player can see the lights a lot better, and at the same time, it's not visibly blinding to the player or distracting. So that's one change right there with the LED light. Next, we look at the buttons. So at first glance, the first thing that hit my mind was the PSP and the PS Vita. So they have that crystal clear look. It's a plastic, and you see the graphics of the designs of the original control shapes on that controller. So it made me think of the PSP and the PS Vita. But as you can see here, you have those little direction shapes, and then over on the buttons, the circle X, triangle buttons, they don't have their colorful hues anymore. but they do have that crystal look and that crystal feel to them, or the plastic look. I don't know if it's a plastic feel. I personally haven't touched one, but I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that that's how it is, especially since it has such a striking similarity to the PSP and the PS Vita. The next button of note is the PS button. So the PS button on the PlayStation 4, the predecessor, it's a circle button that has PS on it. This one, it's the actual logo, which I think actually looks really cool. I think that's a great idea. You have the PlayStation logo as the button itself. And the L and R buttons really don't look that different. They're relatively the same for the most part, but the biggest difference is the functionality. We'll talk about that one in a minute. And then there's the new Create button. So where the Share button used to be, it's still in the same location, but it's no longer called the Share button, it's called the Create button. And a statement put out from Sony basically is saying that they're pioneering or paving the path for gamers and developing new technology for people to create things that allow them to share their gameplay in a more modern sense with the world, or even just for themselves. And next, there is a mute button for the built-in microphone feature. So we'll actually talk about that a little bit later as well. So let's go back to those L and R buttons that I was talking about earlier. This is referring to what they call adaptive triggers. So adaptive triggers is a lot different than the PlayStation 4, because the PlayStation 4 triggers, you just push them and they just simply have that spring-loaded action to push those buttons back out, and allows functionality for braking, drifting, shooting, whatever. Well, these PS5 controllers, the DualSense controllers, have adaptive triggers. So what it does, it basically adapts to the game and it allows a more realistic sense to the player. So if I'm playing a first-person shooter game and I squeeze the right trigger to shoot, I'm gonna feel some resistance, and after so much resistance, then it's gonna give way and it's gonna feel like I'm actually pulling a trigger on a weapon. Whereas, or the next thing is if I'm playing a racing game and I want to drift or brake and I push one of the trigger buttons, it's gonna feel different. It's not gonna feel like I'm pulling a trigger. I'm gonna feel some resistance, and it's like something's pushing back against my fingers because it's to simulate that brake sense. So that's the adaptive triggers. So the next thing I want to talk about is the haptic feedback. So the original DualShocks and the predecessors from the PlayStation 4 DualShocks that had the rumble feature was just that. It was just a rumble feature. So it was adaptive to the game. So if you were playing a game and there was an earthquake going on and it was just the beginnings of an earthquake, maybe the rumble pack would, or the rumble motors would lightly rumble, and then as it got more intense, it would shake at its maximum rumble. So that was actually pretty cool. It's still pretty cool because that's mostly what we know. But this haptic feedback feature is the elimination of that, and it's something totally different. So it makes the player feel more immersified in that game. So there was some gameplay on Gran Turismo Sport, and the player that was actually playing with this controller got to utilize this haptic feedback option. And so this player was stating that they could drive on gravel and they could feel that haptic feedback in the controller, and then also later on, whenever they're driving on a slick surface, they can also feel the slick surface. And for me, I really don't know how to take that. I can't imagine that. I can't envision that, but technology. So that's what haptic feedback is. It adapts the feel of the controller to the player to help them feel more immersified. The next thing I want to talk about is the built-in microphone. So this controller has a built-in microphone, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that one, and I'm not the only one that feels that way. Multiple people across the internet have shared their concern or expressed their concern with this. Hey, let's get this match started. You got your headset on today? No, I don't have my headset, but I got this awesome mic. Well, it sounds pretty good. Let's see how it goes. All right, I got one. Oh, I got shot. He's over there in the building. Over there, to the right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got it. I'm gonna get him. I'm gonna get him. I died. Ah. Okay. Okay. Hey, you know what? Hey, I gotta go, man. I gotta go. Something came up. I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. Yeah, no. It's all good. I gotta go. I'll catch you later. So the big problem is the feedback from the buttons going into the controller and basically annoying the other people that you're playing online with. However, there is another feature on there, and that is the headphone jack being built in, so that way you can still utilize a headset if you don't want to use that microphone. And while I do think that might be a step back, I don't fully know the details, and really nobody fully knows the details. However, it is a lot better than having no mic at all. because there are many times where I've played and I haven't had a headset, and I thought, well, if I could even just give somebody a warning or say anything at all, that in itself would be just amazing in itself. So who knows, maybe it is a step back, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so earlier I had said that this controller also has a mic mute feature. So if you look at the center of the controller, just below the PlayStation button, there's that little pill looking button, and below that is a microphone with a slash through it. So if you don't want your voice or button mashing being picked up every time you get online, then simply just push this button and it'll mute your mic, just like that. Let's take a moment and celebrate the fact that there is no more micro USB charging cables or charging ports. And let's think about how amazing it's going to be to have the USB Type-C connector for the charging port. Yes, the days of micro USB are gone. So those days of you trying to plug in your controller and snapping that little bitty chip inside of your controller, those days are gone. Those days of you forgetting that your controller is plugged in and you grabbing it and yanking it and breaking that cord are gone. The days of those are gone. So now you don't have to worry about breaking that chip on the inside and doing one of a few things. One, trashing your controller because you can't charge it anymore. Two, researching online or YouTube on how to fix this. And three, trying to get a different cable because the cable's been worn out and jerked and twisted and bent and broken, and now you have no charging cable. Those days are gone. So now we have this different type of charging port, and Sony is moving forward with the times, which is amazing. I personally am excited for these new charging port connectors. Another area of discussion for Sony is the battery life. So taking a look at the predecessor, the DualShock for the PS4, the battery life was not the best. It wasn't great, but it wasn't the worst. It just wasn't the best. So knowing that, Sony stated that they have been taking a look at this battery life for the controller, and they have made it a point to not necessarily promise us, but pretty much promise us that these new PS5 controllers are going to have a better battery life, also to include being more lightweight. So if that can happen, I'm ready for it. I'm ready for this. Pricing. So something else that hasn't been defined is pricing. However, looking at the prices of these current DualShock PS4 controllers, and then looking at the advances and the newness of this PS5 DualSense controller, just anticipate that the price is going to be slightly elevated. Maybe it's $59.99, maybe it's $70. Nobody really knows, but I'm anticipating it to be around the $70, $75 price range. While yes, that's a lot of money, there's also a lot of technology, and there's probably a few more features that we're not really too sure about. Now there are some rumors, and take them with a tiny grain of salt. If you take the salt shaker and you look and that little dusting in the bottom, yeah, one of those little dust clumps, take one of those, because there's plenty of rumors still floating around out there, and there's nothing solid or confirmed. And while there are some patents that have a patent out for something relating this peripheral, does not mean that Sony is going to go ahead and move forward with that technology. One of those is possibly wireless charging. So there's been speculation that there's been a peripheral that you attach to the controller itself, and then you put the controller on a charging pad, and then you can charge your controllers wirelessly. The days of cables are gone. However, it's just rumor, and take it with a tiny grain of salt, but there's still just those rumors out there. And while that would be amazing, I'm not holding my breath. But there's still a lot of features to be revealed to us in the future. However, I think what we've got now is groundbreaking, and it's amazing. If you're interested in the PS5, this is something that you should definitely consider. What are your thoughts on it? What features would you like to see in the PS5 controller? And are you gonna purchase a PS5 at launch, or are you gonna hold out for the Xbox One? That's all I got for today. I'm SpeedDemon8706. Have a great day.